Welcome to the fourth and final part in this series on navigation and route planning for adventure riders. If you haven't seen any of the earlier videos, I recommend you click this link in the top right corner and just watch those before you watch this chapter. In this chapter, I'm kind of going to wrap everything up. Hopefully by this point, you've got all the fundamentals down pat. You know how to plan, you know how to bring your files across to the Zumo through Basecamp. I'm going to show you how to not use Basecamp in this video, and I'm going to show you two different ways of doing that. One from a desktop and one from an iPhone or an iOS device. And I'm also going to show you a couple of other just tricks and tips and things that I've found useful. It's like a miscellaneous roundup of bits and pieces that will hopefully just round out the whole course and chapter. Now, I'm not going into a comprehensive list of all of the tricks and tips and cool things on the Zumo, because that would take hours and hours. There's a lot of subtleties and a lot of nuances on the Zumo. This is just the main things that I use during the course of my planning and navigation. Okay, so in this first chapter, I'm going to just talk about why I sometimes use Google Earth Pro. And I don't do this with all my planning, but if I'm planning quite a big trip, often I will do this. And the reason why I like to visualize a trip in Google Earth, there's actually sort of four reasons. And I'll as I take you through the demo, hopefully they'll become obvious. So first thing to point out is this is Google Earth Pro. It's a free download, but it is a separate application rather than just looking at Google Earth in your browser. So to sort of demonstrate things, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into Gaia GPS. This is actually a ride I did probably about 4 weeks ago. And if I go in and have a look at this in the folder, you can see I've got a bunch of routes that I've created, main loops plus what I call exploration tracks off the side. And I've got a folder with my waypoints, which I can turn on or off. So I'm going to come into the overview tab and I'm going to say export, but instead of saying GPX, I'm now going to say export KML. And this is Google's sort of markup language. And it now puts this KML file here. So this has got everything. It's got the waypoints, it's got the routes, etc. Now, if I just move that, so I've now got Google Earth here, I can just take that KML file and drag it in. And you can see it's actually now put in a whole ton of stuff. Now, what's interesting is it actually put some things in here that I didn't want. So you can see it's created this sort of, here is my Dua National Park ride. But this is actually a hierarchy, so I can open that up and I can actually now see the various routes, and I can actually see there's some supporting folders here which I don't necessarily want, and I can turn off the waypoints, and now that leaves me with a pretty clean set of my routes visualized. Now, it's a bit too thin. I'm going to make them a bit thicker. So I'm going to go to one of the parent folders here. I'm going to right click. And I'm going to say, get info. Oops, let's come over from the other monitor. Okay, and I'm just going to go to style color. And it says, hey, we don't share the same style of the things under. So I'm going to just say share style. And I'm now going to make I'm going to make this, I don't know, let's say about four wide. And you can see straight away that what it's done is it's now made all of those different colored routes one color, but they're now much wider, so they're much easier to see. So now I've basically got all of those routes pretty clearly visible in Google Earth. Now, this might sound fairly alien, but let me just, where's the navigation? So now I can literally fly over the route. So I tend to get down fairly low, and then using this top one, I can actually sort of look up onto the horizon. So it sort of helps me look at where I'm going. So the reason why I like to visualize in Google Earth, there's a couple of reasons. One, it's pretty good for just sort of getting an understanding of the type of roads that we're going on. But you can see over here for the layers, I've got turned on places, photos, roads, and terrain, and I've turned off some of this other stuff. But I find the photos quite interesting. So often when I'm sort of flying over a route, I might see something interesting. Now, if I hold the control key down, I can sort of just turn as I go. But often I'll sort of click in on these photos just to sort of see what are they, and sometimes you come across some really interesting things that you wouldn't otherwise know about. So if we look here, let's just go back into. So for example, here, let's get down lower and look out. Okay, so you can now see that there's a ridgeline track here. There's an interesting picture. So I typically click on that. Some sort of looks like some sort of radar, weather radar or something up there, and yeah, I'll just kind of scoot along the route and have a bit of a look at it. And I do find it quite, just really interesting to sort of get a sense for the terrain. And you can see over here, it becomes quite interesting. So if I kind of go along here, I can, I can see the terrain that I'm riding off. Now, Google Earth does a pretty good job in showing some of the roads and trails. So it sort of makes them quite clear. Like you can quite clearly see some of these fire trails, and it actually highlights them in white. And I find sometimes that really helps me to discover some interesting fire trails. So, for example, if we have a look at here, this one here was one that I discovered through Google Earth. So I had the route coming along here, and then I just looked at this sort of valley here, and I saw a couple of pictures. So I was kind of drawn to come over and explore Churros Falls Lookout. Again, you can see some great images of what it actually looks like. But then I sort of saw this incredible valley, and I saw this fire trail running along the top of it. And so I kind of thought, you know what, that would be an epic view from the top of that lookout there, right on the edge of this huge valley. And yeah, the fire trail was really clear. Now, we ended up not riding that because I didn't have time, but guess what? I will go back there and ride that's a 12-kilometer trail out because it looks amazing. And so I found that just through flying the route with Google Earth. You also get some really interesting bits of history. So if we go down into I think it's this little town here. No, it's actually here. Often there's photographs of monuments with links to websites and things like that. But it really, I just find there's an extra degree of information that you get in Google Earth that you just don't get in Google Maps because it's got more of a database of information, pictures, and things like that associated. So that's kind of how and why I use Google Earth just to fly through and have a bit of a look at the routes that I've created in Gaia. So hopefully you found that useful or interesting. If you haven't used Google Earth before, it takes a little bit to navigate, by holding the control key down to sort of navigate your way around. But once you do get the hang of it, it's pretty fast and it becomes pretty intuitive. And yeah, it just allows you to, in fact, if you go to peak alone, you get a bit of a sense for, I think peak alone's down here. Oh, there it is. So here's the big climb up that we did, peak alone, and by getting down low and by looking up, you can really get a sense for, the sort of the hill topology, etc. One other thing that it does that's kind of interesting, it gives you really good elevation data. So, for example, this climb into Peak Alone here was a really steep climb. In fact, it's much steeper than it looks here on this hill. But what I can do, if I go back to Gaia GPS, and let's find Peak Alone, which is down here. Yeah, there it is. So if I'm kind of interested, you can see, and I want to get a sense for, well, how steep is that? Like just this leg from here to here. I can come in and I can say, let's create a route and let's go from here to here. Now, it's interesting, in Gaia doesn't show a route up there, but if for example, if I come on into my New South Wales topo maps, yeah, you can actually see quite clearly that there is a fire trail that heads up here, which is, again, another reason why I do just flip between tracks. Now, because there's no track in Gaia, I actually have to kind of manually trace the route across to roughly follow that fire track up and then up to the top. Okay, so now that I've got that, and let's just put one more there. If I've created just this little mini route for the climb up to Peak Alone, so I'm going to save that. I'm going to call it climb to Peak Alone. Save it. Okay, and then I'm going to export that as a KML. Okay, so here it is. So if I now bring up Google Earth, I'll just drag that on. Okay. So climb to Peak Alone is here, and if I right click, I can actually say show elevation profile. And this is pretty cool. So you can see, if you look on the map itself, you can see my pointer, and then the bottom you get a really nice detailed elevation profile. So you can kind of see, well, where are the steep bits, and it also tells you at the top some pretty interesting information. And so this maximum slope, 37.8 degrees, that kind of tells me, well, okay, that's probably like some of the steepest hills I'm going to ride up. And as it turns out, 37.8 degrees is probably one of the steepest hills I've been up, and that was climbing up here. So that's 35. So it's probably this climb here, which is the steepest part of it. So this detailed elevation profile, again, if you're trying to look at, especially if you're riding perhaps big bikes and you want to work out, well, how steep are the hills? Do I think I'm going to be able to get up them? Once you ride a few hills, if you look at the profiles, you kind of get a sense for how steep is it and what can you ride, and what can you ride when it's dry and what can you ride when it's wet. So just, again, helps you to go into that a little bit more planned and prepped. Okay, just a couple of little tips about retrieving tracks off the Zumo. So the Zumo has a track recorder, which allows you to explicitly record a track as you're going, but sometimes you forget to record the track. However, the Zumo actually just keeps logs anyway of your rides. So I've plugged my Zumo into my laptop here, and I'm in Basecamp. And if I click on the Zumo itself at the top here, then down the bottom, I actually can see all of the assets that are on the Zumo. So I can see here are my waypoints that are on there. Here are different routes that are there. And then you can see these active logs, right? So these are logs that Basecamp automatically records. So often that's useful if you want to actually pull back the ride that you actually did, not the one that was planned, and keep that stored. So for example, here, I'm in my Snowy Mountains ride, okay? Now, I know I didn't ride that, but what I can do is I can actually say, let's create a new list, and I'll call that Snowy Mountains track ridden. Okay, and so now if I come to my Zumo XT, I can actually just come through here until I find all of those logs. So that's 8th, 10th, 12th. I know this ride, I think I started it on the 31st, so I'm just going to pull all of these logs in and just drag them across into that Snowy Mountains track ridden. Okay, now that copies them onto my hard drive here. The problem is now if I click on any of those, all right, if I actually have a look at, let's just click on one. Okay, so this kind of shows you what it's done. So it's actually, whenever you start and stop your bike, it creates a new log. So what I've got is a piece of the track that I've ridden. In this case, it's down near Brindabella National Park. But I actually want, and if I click the next bit, you can see that shows me the next part that I wrote before I turned the bike off, etc., etc. Now, if I actually want to put that together into a logical sequence, I can actually just select all of these, and then I can right-click in Basecamp, and I can just say Join Tracks, and it'll basically ask me if the order's right, and because these are all date and time stamped, they should be fine. So I'll say Join Tracks, and it says a new join track has been created. Do you want to keep the original ones? I usually keep them until I'm sure that it's done it correctly. So what it's done now is it's created this active log with a 001 prefix, and if I double click on that, let's make that say, I don't know, magenta. There is the actual ride that I did, automatically pulled back off the GPS. So this is not my planned route, this is actually my written route. And often, you know, even if you've gotten lost or things like that, you actually want to have a look at where did you go, and save that for posterity's sake. So it's quite useful, that ability to copy the tracks from the XT. What's kind of interesting, and it's a bit frustrating, is, you know, when I click the Zumo XT, you actually think, oh, I'd like to erase some of these things off the Zumo unit. But if I hit the delete key, there's no way that I know that you can do it through Basecamp. You actually have to do it through the unit, and I'll show you that in a separate section. A lot of people have written to me saying they don't use Basecamp, they don't like Basecamp, and a lot of you even say you hate Basecamp, which I can totally understand. It is not the most intuitive app out there, but it is a super powerful app. Once you get used to its quirks, I prefer to use Basecamp as my vehicle for getting files onto the Zumo using a cable. I just find that it's rock solid, reliable, and that's my preferred way. But I'm going to show you now two different ways of doing it if you don't want to use Basecamp. So this first version is using, if you're doing your planning on a mobile phone, and I've only got an iOS device, so I'm going to show you on an iPhone, but if you're using Gaia on an iPhone, how to get the assets from the iPhone through Garmin Drive onto the Zumo. That's the first one. The second method I'm going to show you is if you're using a desktop for your route planning, and how you can actually wirelessly transfer them using Garmin Explore. The first is I'm going to create everything using Gaia on the mobile phone, and I'm going to transfer it wirelessly through Drive. So here I am in Gaia, and let's say that I wanted to create just a route, and I'll just show you how to do it on the phone. So up at the plus, I can say create a route. Okay, then I can put the start point to wherever I want it. And then it's a case of just tapping, and then it will start building the route. So I'm just going to create a bit of a route here. Let's go up here. Okay, so now in red, I've actually created a route on the phone. So if I save that, I can choose a title. So let's give it, let's call it Brent Test 5, and save it. Okay, so now that I've created the route, I can just say, hit the share button down the bottom, and then it says, how do you want to share? So I'll say export a file, GPX, and then you can see I can actually push that GPX file directly to Garmin Drive. So if I click that, it now launches Garmin Drive, and it says GPX file received. Would you like to send it to your Garmin device? And I'll say send. And it says the GPX file will be sent to your Zumo next time it's connected. So if I now turn on my Zumo, okay, in a second it will actually connect to my phone. And you can see it now says sending GPX file to device. Okay, Now it says it's sent. Okay, now it says route contains more than the maximum number of 29 stops, split it into 2 or more trips, or convert them to shaping points. So I'll choose convert. Again, I know some people do it this way. I don't, just because I hate the files that Gaia puts out, but this is one way that you can do it. Okay, so it says new trips were received and added to the trip planner. So now if I go view, there's Brent Chest 5. So I will say, show me that on the map, and there it is on the map, and I can navigate that in the map. The big problem with this approach is that it has created a trip, which is essentially a route on my GPS, and I just don't like to navigate, especially off-road, using trips. So if you want to convert it into a track, Tom Clifford sent me information about this app, which right now I believe it's only on the iOS platform, but it allows you to do what I do in Basecamp, which is to take that Frankenstein route file and convert it into a track file. I personally haven't used that because I don't do my route creation on the iPhone. I do it on the desktop. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to wirelessly transfer your assets to the Zumo if you use the desktop for your planning. So I've launched Garmin Explore. So you can see explore.garmin.com. And this is kind of like Garmin's portal for all devices. And from the homepage, I got some stats, which I never really look at. But one thing I do sort of look at, this is my Garmin Inreach subscription. So I'm on the recreation one, and you can see what that gives me. You can't use your Inreach without a valid monthly subscription. But, you know, I think this is absolutely critical. So I think that's money well spent. I'm going to go into the map tab. And this is where we're going to be working to get our assets onto the Zumo. So from the map tab, on the left-hand side, you've kind of got your library of all the different assets that are in here right now. And then down the bottom, you can see collections. So collections, think of it as like folders to organize your assets, or in Basecamp terminology, it's the same as lists. So what I'm going to do is I've put a couple of GPX files on my desktop here. Due a day 1 and due a day 2 rides. So I'm going to come in, click this button up here, which is the import button. And it now wants to know, am I going to import the data as tracks or as routes? Okay, now we're going to use tracks for navigation. So I'm going to say import as tracks. It then wants to know whether I'm going to add them to an existing collection or do I want to create a new collection. I'm going to create a new collection as I go, and I'm going to call this Dua National Park. Next, it says drag a single file here. So I'll drag that in. It previews it and says, okay, I found one track in that file. Maps can import multiple assets if they're properly formed. So I'm going to say import. Okay, and it's in, and now you can see it's displaying this track. Now, just a rant. I hate the way Garmin is displaying this. I don't know why it's got all of these horrible little markers all the way around. It makes no sense to me, especially later on when I show you tracking data from the Inreach. I just think this is confusing. I can't find any way of changing the color, and I can't find any way of getting rid of those points. So, I can come into the actual track here, and it's got the edit, but it doesn't let me do anything here, and the edit over on here doesn't let me do anything either. So it's really frustrating. When you see routes just look so much better on the map. But nonetheless, that aside, it looks ugly as hell. I don't understand why they've got these markers, but it's in my map now. So let's do the same thing with day 2, import as track. Now I've already created the collection, so I can say add this to my existing collection of Dua National Park. Next, drag the file there. Okay, it's found one track, and import. Okay, so now there is my two different tracks. But you can see I can't differentiate between loop 1 and loop 2. It's just ugly. I have a love-hate relationship with Garmin. I think I love their hardware engineers and I hate their software engineers. Whoever designed this, it's just awful user interface, user experience. But nonetheless, now that this is on Explore, as soon as I turn on my GPS, which I'll do now, you'll see it'll wirelessly get sent across. Okay, so if I turn on my GPS, agree, and if I have a look right now in Explore, tracks, I've got nothing in there. But now you'll see in a moment when it connects to Garmin Drive. Okay, it's just connected and it's syncing. Okay, so now it's done its sync, and if I now go into tracks, there are the 2 tracks that I've copied across. And if I go to my map and zoom out, okay, there are the 2 tracks shown below. Now, right now they've come in the same color, but if I, let's just go back to tracks, apps, tracks. So here are the 2 tracks. You can see they're both red, but now I can actually highlight a track here. I can use the spanner, set color, and let's make the first one say magenta. Okay, done. And then if I come back, let's choose the second one, and I'll use the spanner, set color, and let's make that cyan. Done. Okay, so now if I go back to my map, view map, and zoom out, there they are. Okay, so there are my 2 tracks on my map, and they're color coded. Oh, and also, if I move the map and I get that little icon, that allows me to go into the collections, and you'll see here is the new collection that I created. So I can, if I turn them off, save, now they're no longer displayed on the map. So that's a nice, easy, quick way of determining what tracks you do want to show on the map and which tracks you want to hide. In this chapter, I'm going to cover the Garmin Inreach, and I know it's sort of not strictly sort of route planning and navigation, but it is related, and I'll kind of show you the relation. I actually think this is probably one of the most important bits of equipment that I carry from a safety perspective, and I'm actually going to share with you a lesson learned from my last ride, which literally had life or death ramifications. So looking at the key functionality of the Inreach, I think everyone knows about the One Touch SOS, which gets you help wherever you are in the world. The second one is two-way text messaging, and I'm going to talk more about this when I get to the story and the lesson learned, but I think this is super powerful. You know, maybe you don't have a medical emergency, but you need a recovery. The ability to send a text message out from wherever you are in the world is really important. But just as important is the ability to receive a text message wherever you are, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. The third one is sending preset text messages. I use this a lot when I'm traveling, especially if I'm riding solo. You know, when I get to the camp at the end of the day, I can set up a group of people that are going to keep an eye out for me, and I can just very simply send a text message. Typically it says, "I've reached camp, I'm safe and sound, everything's good." And then the fourth one is real-time tracking of a location. And, you know, if I don't get to camp, if I have an accident or something en route, this allows others to actually go online and actually have a look at exactly where you are and where you've been, which can also help if you get into trouble. So let's start by looking at how you set up the real-time tracking of your location. Okay, so here I am back in Garmin Explore, and this is the two tracks that I uploaded in my Dura National Park collection in the earlier chapter. I'm going to delete this for a moment because I'm going to show you how I used to use this before I sort of started synchronizing with Explore. So I'm going to come into this this collection and delete that for a moment. Okay. Now, one weird, stupid thing about Garmin is I've deleted the collection, but the assets, the tracks are still there. So I've got to kind of go into unorganized. I've got to choose my tracks, and here are those two. So now, if I select those, I can delete them from there. It's just so unintuitive. Okay. So now that that's gone, what I'm going to do, I'm going to reload those tracks, but I'm going to reload them as routes. This is how I used to use the map, and this is how I really enjoyed. I think it's a much better display. Okay, so let's do this again, but this time I'm going to bring them in as routes, not tracks. So if I say import, and I want to import the lines as routes, and I'm going to create my new collection again. So I'm going to say Dua National Park. Next, I'll drag my day one track into here. And it says, hey, I need to reduce the size of this. There's too many points. So I'm going to reduce it to 200. That's fine. I want you to import this as a route. Okay, and now it comes in as a route. And you can see it doesn't have all those ugly points in them. It's a pretty nice, clean marker. And I'm going to bring in the second one now. Import as routes, add it to my existing collection. Next, and now bring in day two. Import routes. Okay, now the nice thing about bringing these in as routes is if I come into the collection and have a look at my routes here, I can edit these. So I can actually say, well, day one, let's make that magenta, and then let's make day two. I'll edit that and make that cyan. Okay, and before I sort of synchronized with Explore, this is what I would actually give out to people that were monitoring my rides. So what you can do is if you click in the social tab now, this is where you can give a link out where people can monitor. So here, MapShare is basically the site that displays your progress for friends. So I've got MapShare turned on. On MapShare settings, I can actually, just create some descriptions and whether I want to password protect it. And then here, this is important. It's probably the easiest way for people to send you messages on your Inreach. Allow map viewers to send you messages. Allow them to locate me, which means they can ping my Inreach to actually get a location of where I am. And this will actually allow them to see any waypoints that I've created while I'm on my ride. So I can save that. And then the last thing that's important is this filtering MapShare data. So you don't want anyone that's going to be monitoring you typically don't want them to have a look at really old data and see all of your old cluttered tracks. So I usually set this to the date just before I'm going on the ride, which means they're only going to see that information. And I can also filter it based on collection as well. So now when I save those changes, this is the link that I want to give out to people. So if I give this link out, then this is the view that they will see. Okay, so they can actually see my planned route. They can see where I'm riding day one and day two. They'll have a little icon of where I am, and if when it's actually being tracked, it will actually look more like. So when I'm transmitting that data, it'll look like this. So this is my Inreach actually pinging my location. So as I'm riding, you can kind of nicely see where I was planning to ride, and it actually shows, if I click on any of these dots, the date and time that I hit each of these points. So I think I had my Inreach set to ping every 10 minutes. And so it creates a nice sort of route of where you actually have been. The other things that are quite important then is if we go into that social page, if people are monitoring your map, from this page that this is probably the easiest way for them to, if they need to get a message to you on the Garmin, they can actually come up here and say message, and then they can put in their mobile number, type the message and hit send, and that will send the message to you on the Garmin Inreach. Finally, let me share with you just a lesson that I learned on my last ride, and it could have had pretty dire consequences. So I was out on a 4-day adventure ride with 2 friends, and we were, for day 1 and day 2, most of the riding we were doing was out in the backcountry. There was no cellular reception, and we planned to be out of reception for a couple of days. And we're having a great time riding. At the end of day 1, we set up our camp in Brindabella National Park, and then we decided to do the ride up to the top of Mount Corrie and just sort of see the view at sunset. And as I got up to the summit of Mount Corrie, you know, I was sitting there. It was just beautiful. I was enjoying the scenery and taking some video with my phone. I happened to look at my phone and I saw that I had a missed phone call. I happened to have cell reception because of the height that I was at. I was getting cell reception from Canberra. And I looked at my phone and I had a missed call from my son. And so I thought that's a bit unusual. So I called him straight back. And it turned out he was in hospital and he'd had a cerebral aneurysm that had ruptured. And he was trying to reach me. Now, I normally do leave my a link to my Inreach maps so that people can message me, but I hadn't on this particular occasion. And so he couldn't actually reach me via Inreach. And I was just so lucky that I happened to pick up on cell phone. Anyway, the end of the story is I rode straight back, packed up my tent, rode straight back to Sydney, made it in time for his surgery, and he ended up having a 3-hour open brain surgery operation. And the good news is it looks like he's making a full recovery from the operation. But the point is, if you've got an Inreach, it's just as important that I think people know how to reach you, especially if you do ride off the grid. So I would say every single ride before you go, make sure you've got a link to the box where people can message you, or give them the email address or where they can actually send a message to you.
So this last tip's more about file administration and just keeping your GPS tidy. It's easy to dump assets into the GPS, but I think it's just as important to tidy them up and delete them when you're finished with them. So before I load up new assets, there are 4 places that I delete files. So I'll come into the trips and I'll look at my saved trips and I'll just go to the spanner and say delete trips, select all, delete. Okay, now I've deleted my trips. I then go into my tracks, and there's 2 places I'll delete out of here. So my saved tracks, I'll just say delete, select all, delete. Yes, that's gone. And then I usually, once I've retrieved any logs, this tab down here, this is normally where your logs will be, but I've already pulled them off the GPS. So I do the same thing there. And then lastly, I come back up, go to where to my favorites, and this is where my waypoints are. So I'll just go delete, select all, delete. Okay, and that's now being deleted from here as well. So by deleting those 4 things, I'm essentially keeping my GPS clean. It means it's, I just think it runs faster, it's neater, there's less clutter, and it's just something I've got used to doing.
Anyway, that wraps up this video and the series. I hope you found it useful. I may put out other videos in the future which are more sort of like addendums if there's major changes or updates or great new tricks or tips that people have sent to me. But for now, anyway, that's it. Safe riding, happy riding, and enjoy your Zumo and enjoy your route planning and navigation.